Todd from New Zealand in back straight is P2. Bray is P7 on mediums. Best lap is a 150.126. Jason Short in left hook is first. Best lap is a 147.420. Todd is P3. Bray in Oak Tree is P7. Dave B Racing is 5th. Chris Butt is 6th on mediums. Best lap is a 149.740. The qualification session is at Virginia International Raceway in Alton, Virginia, USA. Jason Short from New Zealand is P1 on mediums. Bray from Italy in Horseshoe is 4th on mediums. Wiremew in Snake is P1 on mediums. Chris Butt is 7th on mediums. Dave B Racing from South Africa in back straight is P5 on mediums. Chris Butt in back straight is 7th. Wiremew is first. Wiremew is up 8.66 in left hook. Wiremew is up 8.74 in South Bend. That Canadian guy from Canada in back straight is second up 10.81 on mediums. That Canadian guy is up 11.59 in hot pen. That Canadian guy improved his first with a 147.434. Dave B. Racing from South Africa is fifth. Dave B. Racing improved his third with a 151.182. 3.748 off pole. The race dictator from New Zealand in NASCAR Bend is second up 0.16 on mediums. Dave B. Racing in Snake is sixth up 0.80. Best lap is a 151.182. 3.748 off pole. Wiremew is P7 up 0.17. Five minutes remaining in the session. Wiremew is up 8.02 in roller coaster. Wiremew improved his fifth with a 149.334. 1.900 off pole. Bray from Italy is P8. Bray improved his P8 with a 151.940. 4.506 off pole. The race dictator is second up 0.32. The race dictator is up 0.33 in South Bend. The race dictator is up 0.40 in roller coaster. The race dictator is provisional pole with a 147.153. Todd from New Zealand in NASCAR Bend is fourth up 0.11 on mediums. Todd is up 0.19 in South Bend. Wiremew in Snake is 6th up 0.53. The Race Dictator from New Zealand is first up 0.29. The Race Dictator is up 0.38 in Hog Pen. The Race Dictator is provisional pole with a 146.639. Wiremew is 6th up 0.47. Wiremew improved is P6 with a 148.869. 2.230 off pole. Bray is P8 up 1.62. Bray improved is P7 with a 149.951. 3.312 off pole. The qualifying session is now in overtime. Jason Short is P3. Jason Short is up 0.46 in Oak Tree. Bray from Italy in Snake is 7th up 0.32. Dave B Racing in Back Straight is P5 up 0.19 on mediums. Dave B Racing is up 0.40 in Hog Pen. Dave B Racing improved is 4th with a 148.535. 1.896 off pole. Broadcast bot is 20th. The race session is at Virginia International Raceway in Alton, Virginia, USA. The Race Dictator is P1. That Canadian guy from Canada is P2 on mediums. 15 minutes remaining in the session race start. That Canadian guy is now first. Jason Short from New Zealand in Horseshoe is second on mediums. Jason Short is now P7. Jason Short is now 7th. Todd from New Zealand in NASCAR Bend is 3rd on mediums. Todd lost 3rd to Chris Budd. Dave B Racing from South Africa in Snake is P4 on mediums. Ray from Italy in South Bend is 5th on mediums. Dave B Racing in back straight is 4th. Ray is P5. The race dictator entering the pits is P1. Dave B Racing is P5. Jason Short entering the pits is P8. Dave B Racing is now P4. Todd in Horseshoe is P3. Bray entering the pits is 1st. Wiremew entering the pits is 1st. That Canadian guy entering the pits is P7. The race session is at Virginia International Raceway in Alton, Virginia, USA. Todd is P6. 15 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Jason Short from New Zealand in Horseshoe is 2nd on mediums. Wiremew is 2nd on mediums. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P3 on mediums. Wiremew is P2. The race dictator from New Zealand in back straight is P4 on mediums. Wiremew in roller coaster is P2. Dave B Racing in Hawk Pen is 4th. Wiremew is P2, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing from South Africa in NASCAR Bend is 4th, 1.5 behind the race dictator. Wiremew is 2nd, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is 4th, 1.9 behind the race dictator. Wiremew in back straight is P2 on mediums, 1.2 behind Jason Short. race dictator in hog pen is P3, 2.1 behind Wiremew. Wiremew in horseshoe is P2, 0.5 behind Jason Short. The race dictator in left hook is third, 1.6 behind Wiremew. Wiremew is P2, 0.9 behind Jason Short. Todd from New Zealand in Snake is 7th on mediums. Best lap is a 1:48.350. 0.411 off the fastest lap. Wiremew in back straight is second, 0.8 ahead of the race dictator. 10 minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator in back straight is third. Best lap is a 1:48.555. 0.616 off the fastest lap. Wiremew in back straight is second. Best lap is a 1:47.939. The race dictator in back straight is third, 0.8 behind Wiremew. Wiremew in back straight is second, 0.4 behind Jason Short. The race dictator in roller coaster is third, 0.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. Wiremew is P2, 0.1 behind Jason Short. Jason Short from New Zealand in horseshoe is P2, 0.3 behind Wiremew. The race dictator is P3 on mediums, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is second, 0.2 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in South Bend is P3, 0.2 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in back straight is P2, 0.6 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in back straight is third, 0.7 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in hog pen is second on mediums, 0.7 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P3, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in NASCAR Bend is second, 0.5 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in Snake on lap 5 is P3, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Chris Butt entering the pits is P1. The race dictator is now P4. Wyremew is P2 battling the race dictator. The race dictator is third on mediums, 0.3 behind Wyremew. Wyremew in back straight is P2, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Wyremew was 0.9 faster last lap. The race dictator in back straight is third, 0.4 ahead of Dave B Racing. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Wyremew in back straight is second, 0.6 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing in back straight is fourth, 0.6 ahead of that Canadian guy. Wyremew is P2, 0.5 behind Jason Short. The race dictator in roller coaster is third on mediums, 0.4 behind Wyremew. Wyremew is P2, 0.2 behind Jason Short. Wyremew passed Jason Short for first. The race dictator in horseshoe is P2, 0.2 behind Wyremew. That Canadian guy from Canada in NASCAR Bend is P3 on mediums, 0.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. The race dictator is P2, 0.2 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy from Canada in South Bend is third, 0.3 ahead of Wyremew. The race dictator in back straight is P2. Jason Short is second on mediums battling the race dictator. That Canadian guy in hawk pen is third, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is P2, 0.3 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is third, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Snake is P2. Best lap is a 1:47.941. 0.002 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy is P3. Best lap is a 1:49.461. 1.522 off the fastest lap. Jason Short is P2 on mediums, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in back straight is P3. That Canadian guy is now second. Dave B Racing is P4, 0.6 behind Todd. The leader has just finished the race. The race dictator finished first. That Canadian guy finished second. Todd finished P3. Dave B Racing finished fourth. Wiremu finished P5. Chris Butt finished P6. Bray from Italy finished P7. Broadcast bot is 9th. The race session is at Virginia International Raceway in Alton, Virginia, USA. Bray from Italy is P1 on mediums. Bray entering the pits is P19. 15 minutes remaining in the session race start. Jason Short from New Zealand is P4 on mediums. Chris Butt is P2 on mediums. Chris Butt lost 5th to the race dictator. That Canadian guy from Canada is P4 on mediums. Bray exiting pits on mediums. The race dictator from New Zealand is 5th on mediums. The race dictator is now P4. Wiremu and Oak Tree is P2 on mediums. The race dictator in back straight is P4. Chris Butt in back straight is P7. Wiremew is second. That Canadian guy in horseshoe is P4 battling the race dictator. Wiremew in left hook on lap 2 is second, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The race dictator in snake on lap 2 is P3, 0.7 behind Wiremew. That Canadian guy on lap 2 is P4, 0.5 behind the race dictator. Dave B racing from South Africa is P5 on mediums, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremew is P2, 0.6 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator on lap 2 is P3, 0.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. Wiremew in Oak Tree is second on mediums, 0.4 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in back straight on lap 2 is P3, 0.4 behind Wiremew. Jason Short in roller coaster is P2 on mediums, 0.3 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P3 on mediums, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Chris Butt entering the pits is P8. The race dictator is now second. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Wiremew is P2. That Canadian guy is P2, 0.3 ahead of Wiremew. That Canadian guy was 1.8 faster last lap. Todd from New Zealand is P3 on mediums. Best lap is a 2:11.345. 13.778 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy in South Bend is second, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Todd in back straight is third, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. Todd was 9.8 faster last lap. That Canadian guy in roller coaster is P2 on mediums, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Todd from New Zealand in hog pen is third, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is second, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Dave B racing in NASCAR Bend is P4 on mediums, 1.0 behind Todd. Todd was 1.4 faster last lap. Jason Short entering the pits is first. The race dictator is P4. Best lap is a 1:53.144. 4.121 off the fastest lap. Dave B racing in Oak Tree is third. Best lap is a 1:50.757. 1.734 off the fastest lap. The race dictator in back straight on lap 4 is fourth, 1.3 behind Dave B racing. Dave B racing is third, 0.6 behind Todd. The race dictator from New Zealand is fourth, 1.2 behind Dave B racing. Dave B racing in NASCAR Bend is P3, 0.9 behind Todd. The race dictator in Snake is fourth, 0.7 behind Dave B racing. Dave B racing from South Africa is third, 0.7 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator from New Zealand is P4, 0.2 behind Dave B racing. The race dictator passed Dave B racing for P3. Dave B racing in back straight is fourth, 0.1 behind the race dictator. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Todd is P2. Best lap is a 1:48.600. 0.665 off the fastest lap. Dave B racing in Horseshoe is fourth, 1.4 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is P3, 1.5 ahead of Dave B racing. Dave B racing is fourth. Best lap is a 1:47.977. 0.581 off the fastest lap. The race dictator in back straight is third, 0.8 behind Todd. Todd in roller coaster is second, 0.6 ahead of the race dictator. Dave B Racing in Hog Pen is P4, 0.7 behind the race dictator. Todd is P2, 0.9 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator from New Zealand is P4, 0.2 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator was 2.4 faster last lap. Jason Short entering the pits is 8th. The race dictator passed Dave B Racing for 3rd. Todd is P2, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremu on lap 7 is P5, 0.6 ahead of Bray. Jason Short exiting pits on mediums. Todd from New Zealand in Horseshoe is P2, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator in NASCAR Bend is P3, 0.4 ahead of Dave B Racing. The race dictator was 0.6 faster last lap. Dave B Racing in Snake is 3rd, 0.3 behind the race dictator. The race dictator from New Zealand is P2, 0.2 ahead of Dave B Racing. Bray entering the pits is 1st. The race dictator is now P3. Dave B Racing in Oak Tree is P4, 0.3 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in Back Straight is 3rd, 0.1 ahead of Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy is 3rd. Best lap is a 1:47.396. That Canadian guy lost 3rd to Dave B Racing. The leader has just finished the race. The race dictator finished 1st. Dave B Racing finished 2nd. That Canadian guy finished P3. Chris Butt finished 4th. Todd finished 5th. Wiremu finished P6.